The Nigerian government's position on the killings of Christians has often been presented as one of condemnation coupled with assurances of action, yet its responses remain widely criticized both domestically and internationally. Official statements frequently stress that the violence is not religiously motivated, but rather driven by criminality, banditry, and farmer-herder disputes. Successive administrations, from Goodluck Jonathan to Muhammadu Buhari, and now Bola Tinubu, have emphasized that Christians are not being singled out, portraying the crisis as a broader security challenge. Security forces are routinely deployed after massacres. Investigative committees are sometimes announced and promises of justice are made. However, for survivors and faith leaders, these measures feel more symbolic than substantive, as they rarely lead to timely arrests or prosecutions. The perception of bias, especially under Buhari's government, which was accused of being slow to act against Fulani militias, deepened distrust among Christian communities and fed the narrative that the state is either complicit or unwilling to protect them. The hindrances to improvement are layered and systemic. First, Nigeria's security apparatus is overstretched. The military and police face simultaneous insurgencies in the northeast, banditry in the northwest, secessionist unrest in the southeast, and violent clashes in the Middle Belt. This fragmented landscape makes it difficult to prioritize and consistently protect vulnerable Christian farming communities. Second, corruption and weak governance erode trust in law enforcement. Security operations are often underfunded, soldiers and police are poorly equipped or sometimes unpaid, and communities accuse officials of collusion with perpetrators. Third, impunity remains the most destructive barrier. Attacks are rarely investigated thoroughly, and convictions are almost non-existent, encouraging militias and armed groups to act again with no fear of consequences. Socio-economic stress deepens the crisis further. With Nigeria's population surging, climate change eroding farmland, and youth unemployment leaving millions idle, resource competition has turned deadly. These structural pressures make it almost impossible for the government's reactive, military-first approach to deliver lasting peace. Without parallel investments in land reform, climate adaptation, community reconciliation, and job creation, the cycle of killings will continue. Political will is another barrier. Nigerian leaders often shy away from framing the killings as religious persecution, worried it might inflame sectarian divides or tarnish international image. But that hesitance frustrates victims who see their suffering minimized or denied. In short, the Nigerian government acknowledges the violence but downplays its sectarian nature, relying heavily on security deployments that fail to break the cycle. The real hindrances, weak institutions, corruption, resource stress, climate pressures, and political reluctance to confront the religious dimension, mean that promises of justice rarely become reality. For many Christians in Nigeria, the gap between the government's words and the grim reality on the ground continues to define their experience of this long, bloody conflict.
The killings of Christians in Nigeria do not remain contained within its borders. They ripple outward, shaping global politics, economics, and interfaith relations in ways that reveal how local violence can carry international consequences. Politically, Nigeria is Africa's most populous nation and one of its largest democracies. Instability here sends shockwaves across the continent. International governments, especially the United States, the European Union, and the United Nations, have repeatedly called on Abuja to act decisively, warning that unchecked violence undermines Nigeria's credibility as a regional leader. These killings fuel international debates about human rights, religious freedom, and counterterrorism. In Washington, for example, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has frequently placed Nigeria on its watch list, linking the violence to wider global concerns about extremism. Similarly, the European Parliament has passed resolutions urging Nigeria to address what it sees as systemic persecution. When a nation of over 220 million struggles to protect a significant religious minority, the global perception of its governance and stability is inevitably diminished. Economically, the violence carries a heavy global cost. Nigeria is a major oil producer, and insecurity across its states often deters foreign investment. Investors see the pattern of killings as evidence of weak state control, which makes them hesitate to commit capital not only to agriculture, but also to technology and infrastructure projects. In the agricultural sector, which should be a bedrock of Nigeria's economy, repeated attacks on predominantly Christian farming communities disrupt food supply chains, creating shortages that raise prices nationally and reduce export potential. The global economy feels this through higher regional food insecurity and migration pressures, as displaced populations search for safety and livelihoods beyond Nigeria's borders. Aid agencies and international donors are drawn into costly relief operations, diverting resources that could be used elsewhere. Religiously, the killings shift the face of Christianity and Islam both in Nigeria and globally. Nigeria has the largest Christian population in Africa, with tens of millions of believers who see themselves as part of a worldwide faith community. When news of massacres and church burning spreads, churches from the United States to Europe to South Korea mobilize in solidarity, framing Nigeria as a front line of Christian persecution. This solidarity strengthens transnational religious networks, but it also risks deepening the perception of a clash between Christianity and Islam, even though many Nigerian Muslims themselves are victims of violence. Globally, the killings reinforce narratives used by extremist groups and counter-extremist organizations alike, with each side presenting Nigeria as evidence of their worldview, either of an embattled faith under siege or of a society destabilized by Western narratives of persecution. Within Nigeria, the face of religion itself is changing. For Christians, the church becomes not only a spiritual refuge, but also a center of political activism, advocacy, and community survival. Martyrdom narratives emerge, fueling both resilience and calls for justice. For Muslims in Nigeria who oppose the violence, there is frustration that their faith is being misrepresented by militias and extremists. This dual reality reshapes interfaith relations at home. While violence strains trust, it also inspires new grassroots initiatives where Christian and Muslim leaders attempt dialogue to prevent their communities from being permanently divided. Globally, these dynamics influence how religion is perceived. Nigeria becomes a test case for whether faith can be a bridge for peace or a fault line for conflict. Ultimately, the killings of Christians in Nigeria highlight more than the tragedy of local communities. They expose how governance failures in one nation reverberate across borders, unsettling economies, complicating international diplomacy, and reshaping the global conversation about religion. They force the world to ask whether religious freedom can be safeguarded in the 21st century, and whether faith will remain a force for reconciliation or be continually weaponized in an era of insecurity.
Since this October, the wave of violence against Christians in Nigeria remains both widespread and intensifying, as militants attacked Christian villages in Plateau State, in the villages of Rachis and Rawuru, killing at least 13 people, including children, after going house to house, shooting and burning homes and churches. The survivors described the attack as over an hour of indiscriminate shooting and arson. Barely weeks later, a brutal assault on a school rocked the nation. In November just gone, gunmen stormed St. Mary's School, Papyri, a Catholic boarding school in Niger State, abducting pupils and teachers in one of the largest mass kidnappings on record. Reports say as many as 303 students and 12 teachers were taken. Dozens later escaped, but the incident triggered nationwide alarm, the closure of schools in many states, and harsh scrutiny of Nigeria's ability to protect religious institutions and children. Beyond individual massacres or kidnappings, civil society watchdogs released a sharply alarming assessment for 2025. In the first 220 days of the year, more than 7,000 Christians are estimated to have been killed in Nigeria, a figure representing a dramatic surge in violence compared to recent years. The pattern reflects a mix of insurgent attacks, militia and bandit activity, communal violence, and mass kidnappings. In response to the growing crisis, some of Nigeria's Christian civil society groups issued urgent appeals for international intervention, framing the scale and consistency of attacks, including killings, displacement, and destruction of Christian communities, as amounting to genocide under international law. They explicitly called on the United Nations Security Council and the International Criminal Court to dispatch investigators to Nigeria. On the official government side, the mounting violence, including kidnappings of children and repeated church raids, has forced a reaction. In late November 2025, the government under Bola Tinubu declared a nationwide security emergency and ordered a significant security overhaul. Recruitment of thousands of additional police and military personnel, redeployment of VIP security staff to active zones, and deployment of forest guards to tackle insurgents and bandit hideouts. Still, the challenges remain immense. Armed gangs continue to hit remote communities, schools, and churches, often with impunity. In many cases, security deployments arrive too late, or not at all. Displacement continues, and communities report little trust that future attacks will be prevented. For many victims, repeated promises of reform feel hollow. International pressure is rising, but whether it will force deep institutional change remains uncertain. In short, the crisis has escalated dramatically in 2025, with high casualty massacres, mass kidnappings of children, and a surge in deaths among Christian communities. With mounting internal displacement and rising global condemnation, the issue is gaining international visibility. But despite emergency declarations and expanded security forces, many of the root problems, weak governance, impunity, resource conflicts, and insurgent networks, remain unresolved, leaving Christians and other vulnerable communities exposed.